The sun was dipping low on the horizon, painting the streets of Austin, Texas, in soft amber light. It was just another Wednesday for Naomi Whitaker, a 55-year-old black woman and former Navy SEAL, recently retired and quietly building a new life away from the front lines. Dressed in jeans and a plain hoodie, she looked like any other neighbor running errands. Her trunk held nothing more than groceries, and her mind was on dinner until a sharp burst of red and blue lights flashed behind her. At first, Naomi thought it was just a routine stop. She pulled over calmly, hands visible on the steering wheel, heart steady but alert. She had served her country in war zones after all. What could possibly go wrong here? Then ICE officer Logan Barrett, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s with a practiced glare, approached her window, not with respect or protocol, but with immediate suspicion. "Step out of the vehicle," he barked. Naomi blinked. "May I ask why, officer?" "You match the description of someone we're tracking, possibly undocumented. Step out, now." Her stomach dropped. She had heard of stories like this, but never imagined she'd be the one living it. "Sir, I'm a U.S. citizen, born in Ohio. I have my license right here." Barrett didn't care. Moments later, Naomi was yanked from the car, handcuffed and pushed onto the hood of her vehicle as bystanders began filming. Her ID was ignored, her calm questions dismissed. To him, she was a suspect, no explanation required. No one knew her background. No one cared that she had worn the American flag on her shoulder in foreign deserts, had led rescue missions, had saved lives under fire. All they saw was what Barrett saw, a black woman who, in his eyes, didn't belong. By the time she was forced into the back of his cruiser, Naomi's name had already been erased. She wasn't a veteran. She wasn't a citizen. She was just another profile, caught in the crosshairs of bias and unchecked power. But what happened next? That changed everything. If you believe this could happen to someone you know, and you want to see how Naomi fought back, comment the number 7 below to continue watching this story unfold. Because this wasn't just a wrongful arrest. 3 days after her arrest, Naomi Whitaker found herself standing in front of the same system she once swore to defend. Clad in a muted jumpsuit with her wrists still sore from the cuffs, she entered the courtroom with the composure of a soldier. But even her years as a Navy SEAL couldn't prepare her for what was waiting inside. The courthouse, usually bustling with routine cases and traffic fines, had turned cold, both in temperature and in spirit. The moment Naomi stepped into courtroom 4C, all eyes narrowed. There was no acknowledgement of her military service. No mention of her years in Afghanistan or the Bronze Star tucked quietly in her file. Instead, her name was simply listed as Whitaker Naomi, defendant. Sitting at the bench was Judge Malcolm Graves, a man known more for efficiency than empathy. Flanked by the flags of justice, he barely glanced at Naomi as her case was called. To him, this was just another file in a stack, one more body processed through the machine. The prosecution, led by a sharp-suited assistant district attorney, laid out the charges with unnerving ease: obstruction of justice, resisting arrest, and suspected immigration fraud. They spoke as if Naomi had been caught sneaking across a border rather than shopping for groceries in her own neighborhood. The phrase non-cooperative was repeated like a mantra, despite no evidence of resistance beyond her asking, "Why am I being detained?" Officer Logan Barrett, in full uniform, took the stand with a practiced calm. He described her as agitated, verbally aggressive, and possibly dangerous. He painted a picture of a woman who didn't comply, who posed a threat. Never mind the videos beginning to surface online. Those hadn't yet made it into evidence. And Barrett, seasoned and protected, knew how to talk around the truth. Naomi's public defender had been replaced last minute. In her place stood Ariel Brooks, a 20-year-old newly licensed attorney filling in for an overbooked firm. She looked nervous, underprepared. Yet her eyes, when they met Naomi's, burned with quiet determination. But the courtroom was indifferent. When Naomi attempted to speak, to offer context, she was gently but firmly told to wait her turn. The walls seemed to close in. Her record, sealed, her medals, irrelevant, her dignity, stripped, piece by piece. This wasn't just a legal proceeding, it was a performance, and Naomi had been cast in the role of a threat before she even spoke a word. The system didn't care who she was, only what she looked like. And as she sat beside her young attorney, the weight of silence in the courtroom spoke louder than any gavel. Because for Naomi, it was becoming clear. This wasn't justice, it was survival. The fluorescent lights of the courthouse hallway flickered as Ariel Brooks stood alone outside courtroom 4C, clutching a thin file that felt heavier than anything she'd carried in her brief career. At only 20 years old, she was the youngest attorney in her firm, fresh from passing the bar, with barely a handful of hearings under her belt. When her senior partner called in sick and asked her to step in on a small procedural case, she hadn't hesitated. But now, with cameras outside and tension radiating through the courthouse walls, Ariel realized this was no ordinary case. Inside that courtroom sat Naomi Whitaker, a woman already becoming a symbol in the local news cycle. Described as uncooperative by the arresting officer, but praised as a decorated Navy SEAL by online veterans groups, Naomi's story was dividing public opinion, and no one knew which truth would prevail. And now Ariel was the only thing standing between Naomi and a system that had already decided what she was. As she entered the room and took her seat beside Naomi, the contrast between them was stark. Naomi, calm but emotionally weathered, looked like she had walked through storms. Ariel, young, bright-eyed, and still learning the unwritten rules of courtroom dynamics, felt like she was being thrown into the deep end. "I'm Ariel Brooks," she whispered. "I'm filling in today." Naomi studied her for a moment, then she nodded. "You're all I've got?" Ariel took a breath. "Yes, but I promise I'm going to fight." Despite her age, Ariel had something the courtroom hadn't anticipated: fire. She asked for a recess to review Naomi's file, only to discover that key details, like her military service, were completely missing. She requested the police report and noticed inconsistencies in Officer Barrett's statements. The timestamps didn't match Naomi's known location. The arrest form lacked legal justification. There was no body cam footage submitted. Something was off. After court adjourned for the day, Ariel worked through the night, combing social media and local traffic camera logs. She found a bystander's post, blurry video, only 8 seconds long, but it showed Naomi standing calmly with her hands raised while Officer Barrett shouted and grabbed her arm. It wasn't much, but it was enough to suggest reasonable doubt. The next morning, Ariel returned to the courtroom, not as a stand-in, but as Naomi's official counsel. She met the press outside, ignored the condescending glances from more seasoned attorneys, and filed a motion for discovery. For the first time, Naomi had a voice, and that voice wore a blazer 2 sizes too big, carried a cheap briefcase, and refused to back down. Because while Ariel Brooks may have been young, she wasn't afraid of the fight. The courtroom was packed when the next hearing resumed. Word had spread, online, on the news and whispered hallway conversations, that something about the Naomi Whitaker case didn't add up. The city had become a powder keg of opinions. To some, Naomi was a criminal resisting arrest. To others, she was a victim of institutional bias. But what no one expected, not the press, not the prosecution, not even the judge, was what Naomi herself would reveal next. Her young attorney, Ariel Brooks, stood confidently before the bench, requesting permission for her client to speak on the record. Judge Malcolm Graves narrowed his eyes but nodded. Naomi rose. The courtroom, until that moment humming with murmurs, fell silent. "I've remained quiet," Naomi began, her voice calm but layered with years of controlled strength. "Because I've learned to let people speak first. I've learned how to observe. I've learned how to survive under pressure. But today I speak, not just for myself, but for the truth." She paused, then slowly reached into a folder Ariel had brought, removing a single sheet of paper and holding it up. "I am not undocumented. I am not dangerous. I am Lieutenant Commander Naomi Whitaker, retired United States Navy SEAL." Gasps echoed through the room. Even Judge Graves blinked in visible surprise. Naomi continued, pulling out a copy of her DD-214 discharge form and several commendations, including a Bronze Star and a Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal. "I've served 15 years in combat deployments. I've led missions you'll never read about. I've pulled fellow soldiers out of burning Humvees. And yet last week, I was pulled out of my vehicle like a criminal, my hands scraped across hot pavement by someone who didn't ask questions. He just made assumptions. Officer Logan Barrett, seated nearby, visibly shifted in his chair. Naomi's words landed heavy. Had I not served, would I still be worthy of your respect? Or is that the only thing that makes me human in your eyes? Her gaze swept the room. I didn't reveal this before because I knew it would change the narrative. I wanted to be judged as any other American citizen would be, based on facts, not favor. But you refused to see me as a citizen in the first place. It was a twist that no one could ignore. This wasn't just a case about mistaken identity. It was about a country turning its back on one of its own. And now the narrative was cracking wide open. Just when the courtroom tension seemed to peak, the narrative took another dramatic turn. This time, outside the courtroom walls. While Naomi's military service revelation had shaken public perception, it was a leaked video that truly ripped the mask off the system. It didn't come from law enforcement. It didn't come through official discovery channels. It came from a teenager on a city bus across the street who had caught the entire altercation on camera from his phone and quietly uploaded it online. The video began circulating late at night. By sunrise, it had exploded across social media. Naomi Whitaker was trending in all 50 states. The footage was raw but clear. In it, Naomi could be seen sitting calmly in her vehicle, hands on the steering wheel. Officer Logan Barrett approached her with visible hostility. No request for identification, no explanation, just immediate escalation. His body language was aggressive from the first frame. Then came the audio. Barrett's voice, sharp and accusatory. You people think you can get away with everything. Step out of the vehicle now. Naomi's reply was calm. Sir, what did I do wrong? Barrett, you're being non-compliant. Exit the car before this gets ugly. The camera shook as the teenager filming gasped. She ain't doing nothing, he whispered. In the next moments, Barrett yanked open the door and forcibly removed Naomi, pushing her against the hood with unnecessary force, even as she continued repeating, I'm not resisting. I'm a U.S. citizen. The silence that followed wasn't just the result of courtroom decorum. It was the echo of millions watching the truth unfold. The prosecution's claim of resistance, dismantled. The description of Naomi as combative, erased. Barrett's credibility, shattered. By mid-morning, the video was submitted into evidence by Ariel Brooks, who stood in front of the judge with a calm fierceness that now defined her. Your Honor, she said, this is the truth. Unfiltered, unedited, and it changes everything. Even Judge Graves, who had maintained an almost mechanical neutrality, took a long pause before speaking. The courtroom held its breath. Outside, a wave of support surged. Veterans groups rallied behind Naomi. Civil rights leaders demanded accountability. News anchors replayed the footage on loop. The people had seen with their own eyes what the official reports tried to deny. The next time Officer Barrett entered the courtroom, it was with a different kind of weight on his shoulders. Gone was the confidence and the rehearsed statements. In its place, pressure, scrutiny, and a rapidly crumbling defense. The truth, once hidden in the shadows, had come into the light, not through polished legal argument, but through the unfiltered lens of a young bystander brave enough to record what others ignored. And in that moment, Naomi's fight became something larger. It wasn't just about one woman's rights. It was about how quickly the system can dehumanize and how powerful the truth becomes when seen clearly. If this video moved you, if you believe in justice and accountability, comment the number 7 below. If you're still unsure or believe this was an isolated event, press 0. But remember, what happened to Naomi could happen to any one of us. And now that you've seen the truth, what will you do next? The morning of Naomi Whitaker's final hearing was supposed to mark a turning point. The courtroom was brimming with tension. Media vans lined the courthouse steps, and supporters gathered outside with signs reading, Justice for Naomi, and veterans deserve better. Inside, Ariel Brooks sat alone at the defense table, scanning the entrance every few seconds. But with each passing minute, one reality began to sink in. Naomi was missing. She hadn't answered her phone since the night before. No texts, no emails, no social media activity. At first, Ariel assumed Naomi was avoiding the press, or perhaps taking time to mentally prepare. But when she didn't show up to their scheduled prep meeting at 7:30 a.m., panic slowly crept in. By 9:15 a.m., the judge had entered the courtroom, ready to proceed, and Naomi's chair remained empty. The prosecution, sensing an opportunity, leaned in with a smirk. "Your Honor," the assistant district attorney began, "it seems the defendant has chosen not to appear. We respectfully request a bench warrant and an immediate forfeiture of bond." Ariel stood quickly. "Objection, Your Honor. My client has never missed a single appearance. This is highly unusual and potentially dangerous. I request a short recess to confirm her whereabouts." Judge Graves raised an eyebrow, then nodded once. 15 minutes, no more. Outside the courtroom, Ariel's heart pounded. She called Naomi's emergency contact, no answer. She drove to Naomi's small apartment, no sign of forced entry, no unusual activity. Even her truck was still parked in its usual spot. Something wasn't right. Just as Ariel was preparing to notify authorities, she received a strange envelope slipped under the door of her office. No name, no return address. Inside was a single USB drive and a handwritten note. "If anything happens to Naomi Whitaker, make sure the truth is seen." Back in her car, she plugged the drive into her laptop. What she found made her skin crawl. Confidential ICE memos, internal emails, and audio clips. The files outlined an internal operation called Sweep Initiative, a racially charged policy aimed at targeting minority neighborhoods for deportation quotas. Naomi had been flagged not because of any real suspicion, but because she fit the profile. Then came the last clip, an off-the-record conversation between Officer Logan Barrett and another ICE agent. "She's a threat, not just because she's smart, but because she knows things. If she talks, we're all exposed." The puzzle pieces locked together. Naomi hadn't simply disappeared. She had been silenced, or worse, was being hunted for what she had uncovered. The courtroom had seen injustice before, but this was war, and Ariel Brooks knew then. Naomi's case was no longer just about one woman's freedom. It was about exposing a system desperate to hide the truth. The courtroom buzzed with confusion and speculation. Naomi Whitaker's sudden disappearance had fueled rumors of witness tampering, threats, and even government cover-ups. Pundits filled the news cycle with wild theories, and supporters outside the courthouse carried candles and signs that read, "Where is Naomi?" But just as the court prepared to declare her a no-show and issue a bench warrant, the double doors at the back of the room swung open, and in walked Naomi. Wearing a plain black blazer and no makeup, her face was calm, but her eyes told a different story. Behind her walked two individuals in suits, federal agents. A hushed wave of shock moved across the gallery. Ariel Brooks, frozen in place for a second, stood and let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Your Honor," Naomi said with quiet strength, "I apologize for my absence. I was in protective custody at the request of federal investigators." The room shifted. Even Judge Malcolm Graves, who had remained stern throughout the case, leaned forward slightly in surprise. "I was being followed," Naomi continued, "and there was credible evidence that my life was in danger. But I couldn't leave this unfinished. I've returned with the truth." From her briefcase, she produced a flash drive and handed it to the court clerk. Ariel Brooks approached the bench and explained that the drive contained audio recordings, internal ICE memos, and encrypted files Naomi had been sent anonymously days before her disappearance. Among the evidence, a recorded conversation between Officer Logan Barrett and his superior, explicitly naming Naomi as a high-value takedown for optics, a scapegoat to help meet aggressive ICE arrest quotas. The orders were clear: target high-profile, visible minorities who would make headlines and send a message. Naomi stood before the judge and the prosecution, her voice unwavering. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a coordinated abuse of power. The silence was deafening. Barrett looked pale. The prosecution's smirk had vanished. Naomi wasn't just defending herself anymore. She was indicting the system. And for the first time since the trial began, the courtroom didn't see her as a suspect. They saw her as the truth they tried to bury. The courtroom, once a cold chamber of procedure and doubt, had transformed into a stage of reckoning. As the recordings played aloud for all to hear, the weight of truth pressed down on every corner of the room. Naomi Whitaker stood tall beside her attorney, Ariel Brooks, as the damning audio between Officer Logan Barrett and his ICE supervisor filled the silence. "We need a high-profile arrest. A minority vet? Perfect headline. Don't worry about the details. Just bring her in." Gasps echoed across the gallery. Even seasoned reporters, laptops poised on their knees, stopped typing for a moment. The prosecution's face tightened with unease. Barrett, once confident and composed, now sat stiffly at the witness stand, his collar damp with sweat. His lips moved slightly as if searching for a justification that wouldn't come. Judge Malcolm Graves, usually measured and expressionless, leaned back in his chair and removed his glasses. "This," he said slowly, "is no longer a matter of resisting arrest. This is an abuse of authority at the highest level." Ariel didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Her closing statement was simple. "My client is not only innocent, she is a hero who was hunted, humiliated, and nearly destroyed by the very system she once risked her life to protect. But even when stripped of her uniform and her title, she never stopped fighting for the truth." The jury deliberated for less than 30 minutes. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous. Not guilty on all counts. The judge's ruling followed swiftly. He ordered an immediate federal inquiry into ICE's internal arrest protocols and issued a formal apology to Naomi on behalf of the court. But it wasn't just a legal victory, it was a collapse of lies. The structure that once painted Naomi as a suspect had crumbled beneath the weight of truth. As Naomi stepped outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted in cheers, not for a courtroom win, but for the woman who had refused to stay silent. In that moment, justice wasn't abstract. It was real, it was personal, and it had a name: Naomi Whitaker. When the gavel finally struck, it didn't just signal the end of Naomi Whitaker's trial, it signified the beginning of something bigger: accountability. For days, the courtroom had been filled with half-truths, carefully rehearsed testimonies, and assumptions masked as facts. But now, with the jury's unanimous verdict and Judge Malcolm Graves' scathing closing remarks, justice had finally broken through. "Ms. Whitaker," the judge said firmly, "this court not only finds you innocent, it recognizes that you were subjected to a calculated act of systemic misconduct. This court owes you more than a verdict. It owes you a public apology." The crowd, quiet until that moment, stirred with emotion. Reporters leaned forward. Civil rights advocates nodded solemnly. For Naomi, it was bittersweet. The pain of what she endured wouldn't disappear overnight. But the truth had prevailed, and for the first time, it was officially acknowledged. In the days that followed, consequences were swift. Officer Logan Barrett was suspended pending criminal investigation for civil rights violations and abuse of power. The Department of Homeland Security announced a full review of ICE arrest policies with a focus on racial profiling. Internal communications leaked to the press revealed a broader culture of performance-based targeting where minority individuals were disproportionately pursued to meet internal quotas. But something else happened too: transparency. The court ordered that all ICE-related arrest reports within the district be made publicly accessible for independent review. A civilian oversight committee was created, with Naomi invited to serve as a founding advisor. And Ariel Brooks, once the underestimated junior attorney, was now hailed as a rising voice for justice. A reminder that passion, preparation, and courage can level even the most imbalanced playing fields. Justice wasn't just restored for Naomi, it was redefined for the city. The courtroom that once ignored her identity now honored her truth. And while the system had tried to erase her voice, Naomi had made sure it would echo for generations to come. In the weeks following her historic acquittal, Naomi Whitaker quietly stepped away from the spotlight. No press tour, no TV appearances, no best-selling memoir deals, despite the offers pouring in. Instead, she returned to the community she once left to serve her country, carrying with her not just the scars of war, but the weight of having survived a different kind of battlefield, her own homeland. But Naomi's absence from headlines didn't mark a retreat, it marked a rebirth. Within a month, she opened a modest facility on the east side of Austin. It wasn't flashy, no grand opening, just a banner that read, "The Vanguard Center for Resilience, Rights, and Readiness." It offered free self-defense classes, legal rights workshops, and mentorship programs for young women of color who, like Naomi, had been told to shrink themselves to survive. To those who walked through its doors, Naomi was more than a veteran or a courtroom victor. She was living proof that dignity can't be arrested, and that silence, when broken with truth, can shake an entire system. In time, murals of Naomi began appearing on city walls, not as a martyr, not as a victim, but as a symbol of courage, restraint, and the relentless pursuit of justice. People didn't chant her name in protest. They whispered it in moments of quiet decision-making, asking themselves, what would Naomi do? Even Judge Graves, in a public forum months later, reflected on the case with humility. Ms. Whitaker reminded us all that the courtroom is not just a place for rulings, it's a place for reckoning. Naomi never asked to be a symbol, but when truth is nearly buried and someone dares to dig it out, the world takes notice. She was once profiled and silenced. Now she is remembered and respected. From uniform to jumpsuit to legend, Naomi Whitaker became the voice that could no longer be ignored. As we grow older, many of us reflect on what truly matters, not just to us personally, but to the kind of world we'll leave behind for our children and grandchildren. The story of Naomi Whitaker isn't just a courtroom drama or a tale of injustice overcome. It's a powerful reminder that silence in the face of wrongdoing is no longer an option, especially when we have the experience and wisdom to see through the noise. Naomi, a 35-year-old veteran, faced something many fear but few are prepared for: being misjudged not by strangers, but by the very system she once served. Her quiet strength, her measured dignity, and her refusal to let fear define her story offer a lesson that cuts across generations. She reminds us that no matter our past service, accomplishments, or the roles we played in life, we are never truly immune to injustice. But we are always capable of standing up to it. For those of us in the later chapters of life, Naomi's story invites reflection. How many times have we seen people wrongfully accused, quietly swept aside, or spoken over because of their appearance, background, or status? How often have we stayed quiet, believing it wasn't our place, or that it wouldn't matter? But it does matter, because what Naomi shows us is that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it stands quietly in a courtroom. Sometimes it looks like a woman showing up against all odds, with proof in her hands and truth in her voice. She didn't just defend herself, she exposed an entire system's flaws and forced it to confront the truth. And here's the deeper lesson: age does not lessen our value, it enhances our perspective. Seniors, more than any group, have lived through generations of change, from civil rights movements to shifts in public policy. That wisdom is powerful, and in today's world, where misinformation spreads fast and justice can seem elusive, your voices are needed more than ever. Let Naomi's journey remind us that it's never too late to fight for what's right. Whether it's speaking up at a town hall, mentoring a younger person, or simply sharing a story that exposes injustice, every action matters. Naomi turned her silence into strength, and we can do the same.